My family spent 3 years trying to crack a $340,000 trust. My grandmother had already written them out of it. Your son doesn't need a private education if my family is drowning today. Sign the release, Shelby, or the lawyers will take it all anyway. Austin slammed a manila folder on the dining table so hard the gravy boat rattled against the platter. A spoon clattered off the edge and hit the floor. Nobody picked it up. I looked at the folder. Then I looked at my brother. Then I folded my hands in my lap and said nothing. The pot roast was still steaming. My mother had set the table with the good china, the white one with the pale blue rim that only came out for Sunday dinners. There were rolls in a basket, green beans with almonds, a pitcher of sweet tea sweating in the Florida heat. It looked like a family meal. It smelled like one, too. It wasn't. If you've ever had a family member treat your hard work like it belonged to them, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me take you back, because that dinner didn't come out of nowhere. It had been building for years. My grandmother, Evelyn Miller, was the kind of woman who ironed her napkins and read legal documents before she signed them. She grew up during a time when women weren't supposed to understand money, so she made it her business to understand it better than anyone in the room. 12 years ago, when I was 28 and Austin was 22, Grandmother Evelyn sat down with an estate attorney named Arthur Wright and established the Miller Family Trust. The total value was $340,000. She split it evenly, half to me, half to Austin, but she didn't just hand it over with a bow on top. She put conditions on it. Arthur Wright drafted the trust with an ironclad morality provision. It stated, clearly and without ambiguity, that any beneficiary who engaged in financial coercion, bad faith litigation, or legal intimidation against the trustee or another beneficiary would be immediately and irrevocably disqualified from all current and future distributions. Grandmother Evelyn didn't explain it to us at the time. She simply told Arthur to make sure the language was airtight. Then she looked at me over her reading glasses, squeezed my hand, and said, "Shelby, the money will sort itself out. People always show you who they are. You just have to let them." I didn't understand what she meant back then. I do now. For the first 7 years of the trust's existence, nobody thought much about it. The money sat. Arthur managed it. Distributions were scheduled for specific milestones. It was quiet, orderly, exactly the way Grandmother Evelyn wanted it. Then Austin married Heather. I have nothing against love. I have nothing against wanting nice things. But Heather didn't want nice things. Heather wanted everything. And she wanted it immediately. Within the first year of their marriage, Austin and Heather's spending habits shifted from ambitious to reckless. Heather remodeled their kitchen, then the bathrooms, then the master bedroom. She ordered Italian marble countertops and a $4,200 freestanding bathtub. Austin, who worked a mid-level marketing job pulling in maybe $58,000 a year, said nothing. He just handed over the credit card. Then came the vacations, a $15,000 trip to the Maldives, business class both ways. Heather posted every moment online, the overwater bungalow, the private dinner on the beach, the matching linen outfits. Meanwhile, I was waking up at 4:45 every morning to open my first yoga studio in Coral Gables. I built that business from a single rented room in a strip mall to 2 full locations generating $210,000 a year in net revenue. I didn't take a vacation for 3 years. My husband Mark and I drove a 7-year-old Honda. We packed lunches. We put money into a brokerage account that eventually reached $415,000. Not because we were cheap, because we were careful. Austin was not careful. 5 years ago, the phone calls started. The first one was a Thursday night. Austin needed $4,000 for rent. He said it was a one-time thing. He said Heather had miscalculated their budget for the month. He said he'd pay me back by the 15th. He didn't. The second call came 6 weeks later. His car was 3 months behind on payments. The total arrears were $12,000. The dealership was threatening repossession. He needed me to cover it so he could keep driving to work. I covered it. Then it was $8,000 for what he called emergency rent when their landlord threatened eviction. Then $6,000 for a dental procedure Heather needed that insurance wouldn't cover. Then $3,000 for Austin's licensing renewal fees. Then $5,000 because Heather's sister was getting married and they needed to fly to Vermont and rent a house for the week and buy a gift from the registry. Then another $7,000? I can't even remember the reason for it anymore. Over 5 years, I gave my brother $45,000 in loans. Not a single dollar was repaid, not one. I kept a spreadsheet. Dates, amounts, the reason he gave, the date he promised repayment by. Every line had an entry in the amount returned column. Every entry read 0. I told myself it was what family did. I told myself he was going through a rough patch. I told myself Heather would eventually learn to budget. I told myself the next loan would be the last one. I kept telling myself that for 5 years. While I was writing checks, my parents were writing excuses. My mother, Gail, had a way of making Austin's failures sound like growing pains. He's finding his footing, she'd say. Heather just has expensive taste, but she'll settle down. And then she'd look at me over the kitchen counter and add, "You know your brother looks up to you, Shelby. He just doesn't know how to say it." He never said it. Not once. My father, Warren, said even less. Warren Miller was the kind of man who sat at the head of the table and contributed nothing but the sound of his fork scraping the plate. When I tried to talk to him about Austin's spending, he cleared his throat. When I mentioned the unpaid loans, he looked at the floor. When I asked him directly if he thought it was fair, he said, "Your mother handles that side of things." That was Warren. His silence wasn't neutral. It was permission. What I didn't know, what none of us knew at the time, was that 3 years ago, Warren had co-signed a $100,000 business loan for Austin. Austin had some idea about starting a digital marketing agency. He printed business cards. He rented office space. He bought $3,800 worth of equipment. The business failed in 6 months. The loan didn't disappear. It sat there, accruing interest attached to Warren's name. And eventually it became an $85,000 lien on my parents' home. Warren never told Gail. He never told me. He just folded it up and tucked it away, somewhere in his silence, hoping it would somehow resolve itself. It didn't. 6 months before that Sunday dinner, Austin and Heather's debt hit the ceiling. $190,000 in high-interest credit card balances. Minimum payments alone were eating through half of Austin's take-home. The Italian marble countertops were still there. The memories from the Maldives were still on Instagram. But the money was gone. That's when the pressure campaign started. Austin called me on a Tuesday evening and said very casually that he thought it was time to revisit grandmother Evelyn's trust. He said the money had been sitting there for over a decade doing nothing. He said it wasn't fair that it was locked up when his family was struggling. He said he wanted to talk to Arthur Wright about liquidating his half early. I told him the trust had specific terms. I told him Arthur was the trustee and the conditions weren't mine to change. I told him I'd be happy to sit down with him and go over the documents together. He hung up. A week later, my mother called. She didn't ask how Wyatt was. She didn't ask about the studios. She said, "Shelby, your brother needs that money. You need to talk to Arthur and make this happen." I said it wasn't up to me. She said, "Everything is up to you. It always has been. You're the one with the means. You're the one grandmother trusted. So do the right thing." The right thing. She always said that like it meant the same thing as the easy thing. For 6 months, the calls kept coming. Austin, Gail, sometimes Heather, leaving long voicemails about how their children deserve better, how Shelby was sitting on money she didn't need, how grandmother Evelyn would have wanted the family to be taken care of. I let most of them go to voicemail. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just kept living my life, running my studios, raising Wyatt, sitting next to Mark on the couch after dinner while the notifications piled up. Then came the birthday. Wyatt turned 10 on a Saturday in March. We had a small party planned, nothing extravagant, a few friends from school, a cake from the bakery on Miracle Mile, water balloons in the backyard. Wyatt had been talking about it for weeks. He wanted a science theme. He wanted to make volcanoes out of baking soda and vinegar. The week before the party, Gail came over to drop off a casserole dish she'd borrowed. Mark was at work. I was in the studio. Wyatt was home doing homework at the kitchen table. Gail sat down across from him. And according to Wyatt, she looked at him and said, "You probably won't be getting much of a birthday this year, sweetheart. Your mommy is keeping Uncle Austin's money, so we're all poor now." Wyatt didn't say anything. He just sat there. When Mark came home an hour later, he found Wyatt in the pantry, sitting on the floor between the canned goods and the cereal boxes, crying. In his hand was a $50 savings bond his other grandmother had given him for Christmas. He told Mark he wanted to give it to Uncle Austin so Grandma Gail wouldn't be mad at Mom anymore. Mark called me at the studio. His voice was steady, but I could hear the edges of it fraying. He told me what happened. He told me what Wyatt said. He told me Wyatt was okay now, that he'd held him, and explained that none of this was his fault, and none of this was his responsibility. I closed the studio early. I drove home. I walked in through the garage. Mark was sitting on the couch with Wyatt tucked under his arm, watching a movie. Wyatt looked up at me and smiled. A small smile, the kind a 10-year-old gives when he's trying to show you he's brave. I sat down next to them. I put my hand on Wyatt's knee. I watched the movie with them until Wyatt fell asleep. Then I carried him to bed. I pulled the covers up. I kissed his forehead. I walked back to the kitchen. The savings bond was still on the counter. I stood there for a long time. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. The street light cut through the blinds in thin, pale lines across the tile floor. Something inside me shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean, quiet break. Like a wire that had been pulled too tight for too many years, finally giving way. I was done protecting people who used my son's heart as leverage. I picked up the savings bond. I put it back in Wyatt's desk drawer where it belonged. Then I sat at the kitchen table in the dark and waited for the next move. I didn't have to wait long. That Sunday dinner came 3 weeks later. The pot roast, the good china, the manila folder Austin slammed on the table hard enough to rattle the gravy boat. Austin stood at the end of the table, one hand on the folder, the other pointing at me. Heather sat beside him in a silk blouse, lips pressed together, nodding along like she was watching a courtroom drama she'd already rehearsed. I hired a lawyer, Austin said. A real one, not some small-town estate guy, a litigation attorney. And he says the way that trust is structured, it's inequitable, it's challengeable. And if you don't sign the release willingly, we're filing a formal suit for equitable redistribution. I didn't move. You're sitting on $340,000 that was meant for both of us, he continued. And you've been hiding behind grandmother's lawyer for years, acting like you're the gatekeeper of money you didn't earn. Gail nodded. He's right, Shelby. This has gone on long enough. Warren said nothing. He stared at his plate. His fork rested untouched beside the green beans. Austin leaned forward. His voice dropped, but it didn't get softer. It got sharper. Your son doesn't need a private education if my family is drowning today. Sign the release, Shelby, or the lawyers will take it all anyway. The table went silent. I could hear the clock on the wall above the stove. I could hear Heather's bracelet clicking against the edge of her plate. I looked at Austin. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father, who still hadn't raised his eyes. I kept my voice steady. I'm not keeping the money from you, Austin. I'm simply following the instructions grandmother left for us. I paused. I suggest you read them carefully. Austin's jaw tightened. Heather whispered something in his ear. My mother let out a sharp breath through her nose, the kind she always made when she thought I was being difficult. Austin opened the folder. Inside was a formal notice of legal action. He slid it across the table toward me. Read that, he said. It's already filed. I looked at the document. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. I already knew what it meant. And more importantly, I knew what Grandmother Evelyn's trust said would happen next. I sat at that table for another 11 minutes. I know, because I watched the clock above the stove. I finished my sweet tea. I set the glass down, gently. I wiped my mouth with the cloth napkin, folded it once, and placed it beside my plate. Then I stood up. Dinner was lovely, Mom. Thank you. Gail blinked. Austin stared at me like I'd spoken a language he didn't recognize. Heather looked at Austin, then back at me, her mouth slightly open. That's it? Austin said. That's all you have to say? That's all I have to say tonight. I picked up my purse from the back of the chair. I walked to the front door. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. Mark was already in the car with Wyatt, who had stayed home because I'd stopped bringing him to Sunday dinners after what Gail said to him in the kitchen. I got in the passenger seat. Mark looked at me. He didn't ask what happened. He could see it on my face. Not anger, not sadness. Something quieter than both. He started the car. The engine hummed low and steady. We pulled out of the driveway without a word. That night, after Wyatt was asleep and Mark had gone to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table. It was 2:14 in the morning. The house was dark except for the glow of the stove clock and the pale lines the streetlight pressed through the blinds. Wyatt's $50 savings bond was back in his desk drawer where I'd put it, but I could still see it sitting on that counter. I could still see the way the edges were creased from where his small fingers had gripped it. I could still hear Mark's voice on the phone, steady but fraying, telling me our son had offered to give away his Christmas gift so his grandmother would stop being angry at me. I sat there with my hands flat on the table. No phone, no laptop, no noise, just the hum of the refrigerator and the slow tick of the clock. I wasn't angry. I'd moved past anger somewhere between the front door and the car. I felt nothing. Not sadness, not pity, nothing. And in that nothing, there was clarity. Sharp and clean, like the edge of a blade still warm from being forged. Austin had filed the lawsuit. He'd told me himself. He'd slid the papers across the table like he was dealing a winning hand. He was so certain he had leverage that he announced it over pot roast. He didn't know what he'd just done. I didn't need to stop him. I didn't need to fight him. I didn't need to call a lawyer or draft a counter motion or beg Arthur Wright to intervene. Grandmother Evelyn had already handled it. 12 years ago, sitting in Arthur's office with her reading glasses on and her napkins ironed, she had written the exact provision that would answer this moment. All I had to do was verify. I picked up my phone. I scrolled to Arthur Wright's contact. I didn't call. It was 2:14 in the morning. I typed a short email. 3 sentences. Arthur, Austin has filed a formal legal action against the trust seeking equitable redistribution. I need you to verify the exact filing date and confirm whether the morality provision has been triggered. I'll come to your office whenever you're available. I read it twice. Then I press press send. The soft glow of the confirmation screen lit my face in the dark kitchen. I set the phone down. I sat there for another minute, listening to the silence. Then I went to bed. I slept through the night for the first time in weeks. Arthur responded at 7:41 the next morning. His email was 4 words. Tuesday, 10 o'clock. Confirmed. I didn't tell Austin. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell anyone except Mark, who nodded once and said, "Do what you need to do." Tuesday came. Arthur Wright's office was in a low limestone building on Salcedo Street, 3 blocks from my second studio. I'd been there twice before, both times to sign standard trust documents. The office smelled like old paper and wood polish. Arthur kept his degrees on the wall behind his desk and a single-frame photo of his late wife on the credenza. He was 70 years old, bald except for a thin ring of white hair, and he wore the same style of navy suit every time I'd ever seen him. He was already seated when I arrived. A brown expandable folder sat in front of him, thick with documents. He stood when I walked in, shook my hand, and gestured to the chair across from him. "Before we begin," he said, "I want you to understand something. I don't make the rules of this trust. Your grandmother did. My job is to execute her wishes exactly as she wrote them. That's what I intend to do today." I nodded. Arthur opened the folder. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a printout from the county clerk's office, a civil filing. Your brother's attorney filed a formal petition for equitable redistribution of the Miller Family Trust on Thursday, April 11th at 3:47 p.m. He set the printout on the desk between us. The filing is a matter of public record. He reached back into the folder and withdrew a second document. This one was older. The paper was heavier, the font slightly different. It was the original trust instrument dated 12 years ago, bearing Grandmother Evelyn's signature in dark blue ink. Arthur flipped to page 9. He placed his finger on section 14, paragraph C. He read it aloud, slowly and without inflection. Any beneficiary who engages in financial coercion, bad faith litigation, or legal intimidation against a trustee or another beneficiary shall be immediately and irrevocably disqualified from all current and future distributions. He looked up at me. The filing constitutes bad faith litigation against a co-beneficiary. The clause is self-executing. There is no hearing required. There is no appeal mechanism written into the instrument. He paused. As of April 11th, your brother is no longer a beneficiary of this trust. I sat still. My hands were folded in my lap the same way they'd been at that dinner table. The full $340,000, Arthur continued, is now allocated solely to the remaining qualified beneficiary. That's you, Shelby. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I took a single breath and let it out. Does Austin know? I asked. Not yet, but he will. His attorney will receive formal notification by certified mail within 48 hours. I also recommend we schedule a face-to-face meeting so the terms are clearly communicated. Misunderstandings in these matters tend to escalate. I agreed. The meeting was set for the following Friday. Arthur's office, 10 in the morning. Austin showed up 12 minutes early. I know because I was already there, sitting in the same chair, hands folded the same way. Mark had offered to come. I told him to stay with Wyatt. This wasn't something Wyatt needed to be anywhere near. Austin walked in wearing a charcoal blazer I'd never seen before. His shoes were polished. He had a leather portfolio under his arm. Heather wasn't with him, but I could smell her coaching on every detail of his appearance. He sat down across from me. He didn't look at me. He looked at Arthur. "So," Austin said, "are we settling this today?" Arthur didn't respond immediately. He opened the same brown folder. He placed the same 2 documents on the desk. The filing printout, the trust instrument. Mr. Miller, Arthur said, on April 11th of this year, your attorney filed a petition in Miami-Dade County seeking equitable redistribution of the Miller Family Trust established by Evelyn Miller. Austin nodded. That's correct, and my attorney assures me the distribution as written is challengeable. Your attorney may be correct that certain trust structures can be challenged, Arthur said. However, this trust contains a specific provision that governs exactly this situation. Arthur read the morality clause aloud for the second time. The same words, the same flat, measured cadence, the same 12-year-old ink on the same heavy paper. The room went quiet. Austin's expression didn't change at first. His eyes moved from Arthur to the document, then to me, then back to Arthur. What does that mean? He said. It means, Arthur said, that the moment you filed that petition, you cease to be a beneficiary of this trust. The clause is self-executing. It requires no judicial review. It requires no vote. It requires no action from your sister. Austin's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Austin, Arthur continued, folding his hands on the desk, the moment you serve that summons, you cease to be a beneficiary. There is no split anymore. There is only a vacancy where your name used to be. That's not... Austin started. His voice cracked. He swallowed. That can't be legal. It's been legal for 12 years, Arthur said. Your grandmother drafted it specifically to prevent this kind of action. I advised her at the time that the language was unusually aggressive. She told me to make it airtight. I did. Austin looked at me. You knew, he said. I kept my voice steady. I knew what the trust said. I told you to read it carefully. You chose to file instead. You set me up. I didn't set anything up. Grandmother Evelyn set the terms. You triggered them. Austin's hands were shaking, not with rage, with the slow, full-body tremor of a man watching $170,000 dissolve in front of him. This is $170,000, he said. That's my half. That's my children's future. It was, Arthur said. It isn't anymore. Austin shot to his feet. The leather portfolio slid off his lap and hit the floor. Papers scattered across the tile. You're a cold, selfish woman, Shelby. You'd rather see your own brother bankrupt than share money you didn't even earn. I didn't flinch. I didn't lean back. I looked at him the way you look at weather that's already passed. I didn't earn it, I said, but I didn't forfeit it either. Austin turned to Arthur. I'll get another lawyer. I'll challenge the clause itself. You're welcome to try, Arthur said. But I'll remind you that any further litigation against the trust or its beneficiary would be subject to the same provision. And at this point, there's nothing left to litigate. The trust has one beneficiary. The matter is closed. Austin stared at Arthur for a long time. Then he picked up his portfolio from the floor. He didn't bother collecting the loose papers. He walked to the door, opened it, and turned back to me. You'll regret this, he said. No, I said. I won't. The door closed behind him. Not a slam. Just the quiet click of the latch settling into place. Arthur looked at me across the desk. Your grandmother, he said, was a remarkably precise woman. She was. He slid a single form across the desk, a distribution authorization. Whenever you're ready, he said. I signed it. That evening, I drove home. I pulled into the driveway. I turned off the engine and sat in the car for a moment, watching the light in Wyatt's bedroom window. Mark had left the porch light on. I went inside. Wyatt was at the kitchen table, drawing volcanoes. Mark was making pasta. The house smelled like garlic and butter. Wyatt looked up. Hi, Mom. Hi, baby. I sat down next to him. I didn't tell him what happened. I didn't need to. He was 10. He was drawing volcanoes. That was exactly where he should be. My phone buzzed on the counter. Then again. Then again. I glanced at the screen. Austin, Gail, Austin, Heather, Gail. I picked up the phone. I pressed decline on the first call, then the second, then the third. Then I turned off the ringer. I set the phone face down on the counter and went back to watching my son draw. The calls didn't stop for 9 days. Austin called 14 times the first night alone. Gail called 6. Heather left 2 voicemails I deleted without listening. By morning, my phone had accumulated 31 missed calls, 19 text messages, and 4 voicemails. I cleared the notifications the way you'd wipe crumbs off a counter, without thought, without weight. Mark asked me once if I wanted to read any of them. I said no. He nodded and didn't ask again. On the 3rd day, Gail showed up at the house. She rang the doorbell 4 times. I was in the living room with Wyatt, helping him build a model solar system for school. Mark answered the door. I could hear her voice from where I sat, high and sharp, the way it always got when she felt the world wasn't arranging itself around her preferences. I need to speak to Shelby, right now. Mark's voice was calm, even. The same steady tone he used when he explained load-bearing walls to nervous clients. She's with Wyatt. Now's not a good time, Gail. This is family business, Mark. You don't get to keep her from us. Nobody's keeping anyone from anything. She doesn't want to talk right now. There was a pause. I heard Gail shift her weight on the porch. I heard the sharp exhale through her nose. Tell her she's tearing this family apart, Gail said. Mark didn't respond to that. I heard the door close, not a slam, just the quiet click of the lock sliding into place. He came back into the living room. Wyatt was gluing Saturn's rings onto a styrofoam ball. Mark sat down beside me and picked up the tube of glue. Neptune next, he said. Neptune next, Wyatt said. That was the last time anyone came to the house. I went through my contacts that night after Wyatt went to bed. I blocked Austin's number, then Heather's, then Gail's. I removed myself from the family group chat. I deleted 3 years of text threads without scrolling through them. I removed Gail from Wyatt's school emergency contact list and replaced her with Mark's mother. I didn't do it in anger. I did it in clarity. Mark sat beside me on the couch while I did it. He didn't say a word. When I was finished, he put his hand on mine and squeezed once. The house was quiet. For the first time in months, the quiet wasn't heavy. It was clean. The weeks that followed were unremarkable in the best possible way. I opened the studios at 5:30 every morning. Mark drove Wyatt to school. We ate dinner together at the kitchen table. Wyatt's solar system got an A-. He was upset about the minus. I told him Saturn's rings were worth at least a full point. He laughed. A real laugh. Not the careful, measured kind he'd started using around my family. A real one. The information about Austin came slowly, the way water finds cracks in concrete. I didn't go looking for it. But Coral Gables isn't a big place. And people talk. The first thing I heard was about the SUV. Austin drove a $75,000 black Escalade. Leased, technically, though he talked about it like he'd bought it outright. Within 6 weeks of the trust ruling, he sold it. Not to a dealer. To a private buyer, a contractor from Hialeah who paid $42,000 cash. Austin needed the money to cover his attorney's fees from the trust challenge and the early termination penalty on the lease. He started driving Heather's car after that, a white Audi Q5 they'd bought 2 years earlier. It was already 3 payments behind. The second thing I heard was about the house. Not Austin's house. My parents' house. The $85,000 lien. When Austin's lawsuit triggered the morality clause, it also triggered a cascade of legal disclosures. Arthur Wright, in his role as trustee, was required to document the full financial picture of all parties named in the trust dispute. That documentation revealed that Warren had co-signed Austin's failed business loan 3 years earlier and never disclosed it to anyone. The loan had defaulted. The lender had placed an $85,000 lien on Warren and Gail's home. Gail found out about the lien from a letter that arrived in their mailbox on a Tuesday in May. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from a cousin who lived 2 streets over and said she could hear the shouting from her porch. Gail hadn't known. For 3 years, Warren had sat at that dinner table, silent as stone, while an $85,000 debt clung to the deed of their home like a tumor. He'd said nothing. Not to his wife, not to his daughter, not to anyone. He just cleared his throat and stared at his plate and hoped it would resolve itself. It didn't resolve itself. It metastasized. Within 3 months, Warren and Gail were forced to refinance. Their credit scores had dropped. Warren's was 489. Gail's was 512. The best rate they could get was 8.7% on a 15-year term. Their monthly mortgage payment nearly doubled. Gail took a part-time job at a gift shop on Miracle Mile. Warren, 68 years old with a bad knee, started driving for a rideshare company 4 mornings a week. The silence that had defined Warren's entire personality had finally cost him something he couldn't ignore. Austin's situation was worse. Without the $170,000 from the trust, the $190,000 in credit card debt became the only number that mattered. The minimum payments alone consumed more than Austin's marketing salary could sustain. Creditors began calling. Then they began sending letters with words like collections and legal action and wage garnishment. Austin tried to negotiate. He called the credit card companies and asked for hardship reductions. Some agreed to lower the interest rate temporarily. Most didn't. The total debt, after accumulated interest and late fees climbed past $200,000 by August. He took a second job, warehouse work, 50 hours a week loading pallets on a dock in Doral from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m., then driving to his marketing job for a 2 p.m. shift. He did this for 4 months before the marketing firm let him go. Not for performance, for attendance. He kept falling asleep at his desk. By October, Austin was working the warehouse full-time at $19.50 an hour. The charcoal blazer hung in a closet he could barely afford to keep. Heather left in November. I heard it from a woman at my studio whose sister worked in the same building as Heather's divorce attorney. Heather filed first. She cited financial mismanagement. She took the children to her mother's house in Sarasota. Austin didn't contest it. He didn't have the money for a lawyer even if he'd wanted to. The Audi was repossessed in December. Austin started riding the bus. I didn't celebrate any of this. I didn't track it on a spreadsheet or mark dates on a calendar. The information arrived, and I let it pass through me the way weather passes through an open window. I noted it, I understood it, and I let it go. Because it wasn't about Austin anymore. It hadn't been about Austin since the night I sat at the kitchen table at 2:14 a.m. and decided I was done protecting people who used my son as a bargaining chip. 10 months after the morality clause activated, I signed the lease on my third yoga studio location. It was a beautiful space, a converted gallery on Ponce de Leon Boulevard with polished concrete floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the kind of warm, golden light you can't manufacture. The build-out cost $112,000. I paid for it from the trust distribution. Grandmother Evelyn's money used exactly the way she would have wanted. Not to bail someone out, not to keep the peace, to build something. Mark designed the layout. He volunteered the architectural drawings for free, which I told him was unnecessary, and he told me was non-negotiable. He even calculated the natural light angles so the morning classes would never need overhead fixtures before 9 a.m. On the day we painted the main studio, Wyatt came with us. He wore an old t-shirt of Mark's that hung past his knees, and he used a roller on the bottom 3 feet of the south wall. He chose the color himself, a pale sage green that he said looked like the inside of a leaf. We painted for 4 hours. Mark put on an oldies station. Wyatt got more paint on himself than on the wall. At one point, he stepped back, tilted his head, and said, "It looks like a place where people would feel calm." I set my roller down. I looked at my son. 11 now, tall for his age, standing in the middle of an empty room that smelled like fresh paint and possibility. "It does," I said. He grinned. Not the careful smile he used to wear around my family. A full, open grin with paint on his chin and his father's too big shirt falling off one shoulder. That evening, after we'd cleaned up and driven home and eaten leftover chicken and rice at the kitchen table, Wyatt looked at me and said something I didn't expect. "Mom, you did the right thing." I didn't ask him what he meant. He was 11, not blind. He understood more than I'd ever given him credit for. "Thank you, baby," I said. "Grandma Evelyn would be proud," he said. Then he went to his room to finish his homework. I sat at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where I'd sat in the dark 10 months earlier, the same refrigerator humming, the same clock ticking above the stove, but everything else was different. The phone was quiet. The house was warm. My son was safe and happy and painting walls the color of the inside of a leaf. My husband was in the next room, sketching something on a notepad, probably another redesign, for the studio entryway. I didn't close the door on my brother. He locked it himself the moment he decided my son's future was negotiable. The cut was clean. Some doors stay closed for a reason. I never regretted a single second of it. If you enjoyed this story about protecting your children, setting boundaries, and knowing when to let the people who hurt you face their own consequences, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.